They miss Christmas. How could anybody miss Christmas? Well, they did. And I'm going to tell you who they were. That first Christmas is described this way. Matthew 1, chapter 18, or chapter 1, verse 18. The birth of Jesus took place like this. Mary, his mother, got pregnant before she was married to Joseph, her husband, and he didn't know that. An angel explained it to him. Mary's pregnancy was spirit conceived. God's Holy Spirit had made her pregnant. She will bring a son into the world, and she's going to call him Jesus. His purpose in coming to the earth was to save his people from their sins. It happened, and it all took place in Bethlehem, in Judah, King David's town. Mary gave birth to a son, Luke chapter 2, verse 6, her firstborn. It says she wrapped him in a blanket and laid him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. No room. That's going to be the key to my talk. That event, Jesus' birth, really made history. Your calendar on the wall begins at his birth. All of the Old Testament writings pointed to his coming. Every year throughout the world, Christmas has been celebrated down through the ages, and it's held as Jesus' birthday. Churches make a big deal out of it. They stretch it over 4 weeks. They call it the Advent. Christmas trees are decorated. Gifts are exchanged. Turkeys are roasted. Feasts are held. Shopping malls get crowded. Carols are sung. It's the busiest travel time of the year, and guests and families, they come from all over the country. And Christmas lights are everywhere. I live in Cochrane. Our little town has beautiful lights downtown. But at that first Christmas, in that little stable in that town called Bethlehem, there were people missing. They missed Christmas. Those missing are the subject of my talk. When I'm telling it, I want you to ask yourself this. Have I missed Christmas? Here are the first ones missing that first Christmas. The religious leaders. They weren't there. The Jewish version of the Vatican was only 3 miles from that stable where Jesus was born. The Jewish temple was there in Jerusalem. It contained the Holy of Holies and the Ark of the Covenant. And the Jewish university was there, and so was their seminary. And all the books of the law, the 10 Commandments, the high priests were there. All the holy orders, Sadducees, Pharisees, Sanhedrin, priests, presiding officers, temple guards, central treasury, religious ambassadors from all over the other countries, and finally, the nation's archives. They were there. The only thing missing through all the Jewish writings and waitings was their coming Messiah. He hadn't come yet. They anticipated his coming. All their Old Testament prophecies, they said he was going to be coming. And they also said where he would arrive. Every rabbi, I bet you he preached that every week. Every man, woman, and child that was Jewish, they were aware and anticipated that he was going to come. Every Sabbath table that was set forth on Friday night for the family, they always kept an empty chair to welcome him if he came. But there were no religious leaders at that first Christmas. They knew that he was coming, but they missed it. Isaiah warned them in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. Here is the sign. A virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and he will be called Emmanuel. That's what happened. Mary was chosen. She was the virgin. The Holy Spirit came upon her, and she conceived. Micah chapter 5, verse 2. It will happen in Bethlehem. You're small above the clans of Judah, but out of you is going to come one who is going to be the ruler over all of Israel. That's where it happened. It wasn't secret. Bethlehem was David's city, and it became the city where Jesus was born. Here's another one. When Jesus was a child, it says in Hosea chapter 11, verse 1, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. Herod destroyed all the boys under the age of 2. Mary and Joseph had to flee for their life, and they fled to Egypt with the baby Jesus. That was all said in Hosea. I think Isaiah, though, he said it best. He was writing 800 years before Christ's birth. He said that the Messiah was coming to establish his kingdom. And the period of Isaiah that he wrote this, it was the Jewish history that was very tumultuous. The Assyrians were on the march. They were taking people into captivity by the droves. The Jews were one of them. Isaiah's prophecy gave the people hope. A child would be born to fulfill David's covenant. And he would bear these wonderful titles: Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. The child was Christ. Every Hebrew boy and girl was taught that from their mom and dad since they were children. The religious leaders, they preached at every synagogue, every seminary class. Those new priests, they heard that. Every Jewish funeral, they mentioned that there was a Messiah coming. But they weren't there. The religious leaders did not come to that first Christmas. Well, here's a second group that didn't come. He was the Jewish king. Imagine. The ruler of the whole Jewish empire. He missed Christmas. I'll read it for you. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem, in the territory of Judah, this was during Herod's kingship, a band of scholars arrived in Jerusalem from the east. Remember the wise men? This is them. They asked around, where can we find and pay homage to the newborn King of the Jews? We observed a star in the eastern sky that signals his birth, and we're on a pilgrimage to worship him. Now watch what happens. When word of their inquiry got to Herod, he was terrified. Herod lost no time. He gathered all the high priests and all the religious scholars in the city, and he asked, where is this Messiah that's coming for you guys? Where is he supposed to be born? They told him Bethlehem. Micah the prophet, he predicted that. When Herod heard that it was Bethlehem, he pretended that he was excited to meet this new king too, just as much as these guys were. Matthew 2, verse 8. Herod told the wise men, go find the child and don't leave any stone unturned. As soon as you find him, send word to me and I'll join you at once, and I will come and worship him too. Who is this Herod that missed Christmas? Well, he was called Herod the Great. And he was put in power, not by the Jews. He was put in power by the Roman Empire because he wasn't a Jew. Like most kings, He was hungry for more power. And when the wise men came to Jerusalem looking for this newborn king of the Jews, and they saw his star and they came from the far east to worship him, they didn't come all that way to see Herod. That's not why they came. They came for another king. Hearing this, Herod went off the rails and he started lying. And he lied through his teeth. This Jesus child, he's going to topple my throne. He's going to take over. I'm going to get booted out. My children are going to lose their succession. My family name will die. God warned the wise men of Herod's plot, just in a dream. So they found Jesus, and they gave him gifts, and they did not return to Herod. After Herod realized that they had evaded him, he ordered the death of every child under the age of 2 in the town of Bethlehem. Herod was ruled by fear. He had the fear of losing what was most important to him, and that was power. He missed Christmas. Jesus' presence was God's healing mercy here in human history. Mercy always centers around conflict. Jesus, even at his birth, exposes the violence of Herod. Jesus' Christmas card to me and to you and to the world was just the opposite. In it, he tells me about trust. He gives me acceptance. He shows me openness. And above all, he gives me mercy. Jesus' approach to life was entirely different from Herod's. And even in our day, I don't think people are much different than Herod. We still have evil men and evil women. They rise up against God's work. Remember what Jesus said in Matthew 16:18? I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. The tidings of Jesus' birth were the tidings of a brand new expression of God's abundant mercy and healing. Herod missed that. Think of what he could have been if he went with the wise men and he found the King of Kings. He didn't. He missed Christmas. Finally, there's one more party that missed Christmas. The innkeeper at Bethlehem. Jesus made his entry into the human history, and his birth went almost unnoticed, except for a few shepherds. They found him. The epicenter of Jesus' birth was Bethlehem, but it was teeming with activity. No one took notice of his birth. Caesar Augustus, he had ordered that a census be conducted in the Roman Empire, and it required families traveling to their city's origin. Well, that was Bethlehem for most. That's why the city of Bethlehem was bulging with people. Joseph and his very pregnant wife, Mary, they arrived in Bethlehem, and it was very disappointing. No place to stay. No vacancy signs on every room, in every motel and every hotel and every B&B. In the center of town, there's a large inn. And Joseph, he approached the innkeeper. He's a bit desperate now. He thinks Mary is quickly approaching delivery. The innkeeper said, "We're at capacity. There's not a room available in this building, and there isn't a room available in any building in town." And he saw Mary's look on her face when he said that. He also saw her maternity dress and her stomach protruding. And he also saw the look on her face when he said what he did. It was the look of a lady in desperation and disbelief. The innkeeper showed no feelings. He was preoccupied with his profit. He praised Caesar in Rome up and down for his idea to bring new customers to his place of origin. He had already turned away 3 dozen before Joseph came in. The only thing on the innkeeper's mind now was just keep the guests comfortable, and even though the room is a bit overcrowded in the hotel, keep them there. They'll be okay. Do you mean it's more important than missing the most significant birth in human history? You think about that. There had to be a lot of people standing around that innkeeper's table at his desk, 2 or 3 dozen, milling here and there, laughing and drinking. And I find it intriguing that not one in the inn, standing there in that great big lobby, gave up their space for a pregnant woman. They wouldn't even leave the inn if they had to. If anyone seeing this, they could rearrange a child or 2. They could double up. That wouldn't be too hard, would it? Trouble is, everybody was settled in and they were all comfortable. The idea of picking up and moving, that's just annoying. Difficult enough to try and take care of your own family in a crowded inn without looking after somebody else's plate who's a stranger, even if she did happen to be pregnant. Family reunions were taking place in that inn that night. Families had traveled from far and wide to fulfill the census. They were partying, enjoying each other. They weren't going to miss out on that. Preoccupation always produces indifference. When you focus on your own wants, nobody cares about the wants of others. That innkeeper, he overlooked the needs of this pregnant woman. If they could have only known the significance of the child that was going to be delivered, the innkeeper missed Christmas. Victor Hugo, he was the French classic writer. He wrote Les Miserables. One of the characters in his classic was a man named Jean Valjean. He was just a vagabond, recently released from prison. He was in midlife, wore threadbare trousers and a tattered jacket. After 19 years in a French prison, he came out rough, tough, and now fearless. He had walked 4 days from the prison, there in the alpine chill of 19th century southeastern France. He couldn't find an inn that would take him in. That was the opposite of the Christmas story. They had room, but they didn't want him. He couldn't even find a tavern where he could feed him. He sees a church parsonage, the home of an old preacher. The preacher's name is Monsignor Myriel. He's 75 years old. Like Valjean, the French Revolution took all his valuables from his family, except some silverware, a soup ladle, and 2 candlesticks. Jean Valjean tells his story to the old preacher, and he expects the religious man to turn him away. Instead, the old clergyman, he shows him kindness. He asks the visitor to sit down next to the fire. "You don't need to tell me who you were," he said. "This house isn't mine. It's the house of Jesus." The old preacher, he sits the ex-convict down at his table, and he serves him supper. He serves him soup, bread and cheese, some figs, and a fine wine. They eat with the pastor's fine silverware. He then shows Valjean a bedroom, warm water, and a clean towel. In spite of the comfort, this ex-prisoner, he can't sleep. He received nothing but kindness from the old pastor, but he couldn't resist the temptation. He stuffs the silverware into his knapsack. The Monsignor, he sleeps through the robbery. Valjean, he takes off into the night. He doesn't get very far. The police find him. They march him back to the parsonage. Valjean knows what capture means. It's going to be prison for the rest of his life. But something wonderful happens when they bring him back to the old parsonage. Before the officers can open their mouths, the old preacher, he steps forward and he says, "Oh, here you are. I'm so glad to see you again. I can't believe you forgot the candlesticks. They're made of pure silver as well. Please take them with your forks and knives that you took, that I gave you." Jean Valjean, he just stood and stared dumbfounded at the priest. Monsignor dismisses the policeman, and now they're alone. And he returns to Jean Valjean and he says, "My brother, you no longer belong to evil. You now belong to good. I have brought you, and now I have bought you. I bought your sin for you. I have given your evil thoughts and your wicked deeds and your spirit of hell to the Lord." Valjean, he fell to his knees in sorrow. He repents. He becomes the mayor of the town. He takes pity on a dying mother, and he raises her daughter. If the religious leaders and King Herod and the innkeeper had done what Jean Valjean did at that Christmas, I think they would have been at the Christmas manger. Don't you? They miss Christmas. Don't you miss Christmas? I want you this Christmas, I want you to make room for Jesus. And maybe you could see him born at your house. Wouldn't that be a great Christmas for you? Thanks for joining me today. I'll look for you next week.